Welcome back to Season 2 of Light in the Battle, Emotional Detachment as a Tactical Advantage for Family Court. Today we talk about why you don't win in court by being right. You win by being regulated, consistent, strategic, coachable, and impossible to trigger and bait. This will be our motto for this episode. Light in the Battle is a podcast for single moms healing from narcissistic abuse, and it's a space where we become clearer, calmer, and spiritually and legally harder to mess with. What I've observed in my journey is that the legal advice and strategy for family court against people who make us feel confused or scared just doesn't land when emotions are running high. I'm seeing survivors share stories of losing in court over and over. And then at some point I figured it out, even in my own journey. The safe parent has to show that they are the stable, child-focused parent in all the evidence that they generate, the emails and the texts mostly, and in their demeanor in court. As long as survivors show up in court frazzled with raging PTSD and resentment, and as long as they keep writing angry emails, or share how mad they feel that contact has been allowed or refuse to cooperate on certain aspects, while those feelings are valid, the protective parent is never going to win. These emotions and feelings won't change after we achieve emotional detachment. However, survivors need to get to a point where they can stop creating content for the other side to use to make them appear unstable and unsafe for the child. So throughout this season 2, I took you on the journey that I traveled to get to a point where I detached completely. I cared just as much about my child's well-being. However, I got my head out of my butt and I worked on myself so I could get to a new and improved version, a version of myself that could play by the court's rules to show the truth and the patterns of behavior in an indisputable manner. Everything I've just said here is the goal, the overarching goal of season 2 and where I was working to get you to. In the season finale, I'm going to show you why all the steps that I walked you through so far are what makes you impactful in court. Short disclaimer before I start, please remember that while I'm highly educated, I'm not a legal professional. So whenever I use the words win or lose, I'm saying increase your odds of winning and increase your odds of losing. I'm not God. I can't make promises. And so please bring whatever resonates with you to the attention of a legal professional. What I am committed to, however, is to support you in your mindset shift so that you can become coachable. The mindset I want you to get to with season 2, and that's what we'll be covering today, is that you don't win in court by being right or by feeling strongly about something. You win by being regulated, consistent, strategic, coachable, and impossible to trigger and bait. Up to this point, you've been learning, processing, and you've started shifting, but you may not fully see why all of this matters strategically in your family court battle. What I've taught you so far was an organized process to get you to a point where you become untouchable in high conflict dynamics. The image that comes to mind, I talked about the Chinese finger trap in episode 26 about surrender, same difference. The image that comes to mind is that as survivors going to court against co-parents that display dysfunctional patterns of behavior, we feel and we act like we're a wild animal trapped in a net. And the more we struggle inside the net, the more it tightens. That net, it's the reality of our situation. It's our trauma, our difficult co-parent, our powerlessness in some regards. It's that terror we feel. It's the realization that this person will always be in our lives, that the kids are just tools being used to control us. All of it sucks, and we're like wild animals stuck in that net and trying to fight against it. Emotional Detachment is when you stop struggling and flailing your arms around inside the net so you can calm down and start cutting little pieces of it thread by thread. Reposition yourself inside the net, figure out how you can have it loosen, find the exit, and get back up on your feet. Powerful, impactful, in full control of what you can control, your mindset and your behavior. So although season 2 covered a lot of items that are about healing, the overarching goal is to get you to a sense of power and agency over your situation. You won't win in court by being right and by feeling strongly about things. You will increase your odds of winning by being regulated, consistent, strategic, coachable, and impossible to trigger and bait. This season so far may have felt like trauma recovery, emotional work, and personal growth. And it's true. A lot of the episodes someone may use as a standalone episode for self-development. Like you might need to learn how to forgive just because you need to forgive someone, or you might be curious about codependency completely outside of the context of a high conflict legal battle. But what I had in mind the whole time and where I'm wanting to take you is that I wanted to build your stability for family court. Because in high conflict situations, you'll increase your odds of winning when you're calm, when you're credible, and when you take the focus away from yourself as a target and you put it fully on the kids and on showing that you are willing to co-parent. Showing you are willing to co-parent is how you win over time, because the other party is incapable of maintaining a healthy co-parenting dynamic. So over time, you'll be able to show a documented, repeated pattern of one parent being friendly and cooperative and the other being completely incompetent to co-parent with you. Quick note before I move on, I'm on Facebook. You can follow my page at facebook.com/lightinthebattle, one word. And if you can also leave this show a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening from, this will encourage the algorithm to push my content upwards for any other women that may need to hear this. Thank you so much. Something I want you to understand about family court is that family court is not trauma-informed. You may be painfully aware of this, but let's call it out clearly. Family court is not trauma-informed. It's not emotion-friendly. It's not interested in your story. And it is not looking at what's going on between the adults. A lot of survivors are separating the two, and what they're doing is they're taking the abuse to a criminal court so that it's separated from what's going on in family court, which won't listen to that. The judge is not your friend. Your lawyer is not your therapist. They are legal professionals that are trained to look for and to put together patterns of behavior that identify clearly in their eyes who is more emotionally stable, child-focused, and willing to co-parent. They'll look at behavior, documented patterns, and presentation the day of the hearing. So if you show up reactive, you're easily baited and triggered, you're emotional, you're disorganized because you show up with a pile of documents that nobody's going to look at. And if there are threads of written communication where you can be made to look unhinged, even if your concerns are valid, you can be perceived as the unstable parent that's unwilling to co-parent and that's focused more on the past and on the dynamic between the adults than on the children's future. That's the reality. It sucks, but like we talked about in episodes 26 and 27 about surrender and about grief, it is what it is. It is what it is. You can't control that. These are the rules of the game. You learn them and you play by the rules. It's the only way. The reason survivors can have their kids taken away from them is that the emails they send and the texts they send, their demeanor in court, all of that can be used by the other side to make them look unstable and safe and non-child focused. And that's what the courts look to identify quite quickly. On the other side, you may have someone with a personality disorder. That includes them being void of empathy, which is how they can show up and look calm and collected and trustworthy, sometimes even with documented reactive abuse. And so in the eyes of a judge who doesn't know you two, doesn't have 10 hours to dedicate to studying your case, who do you think looks like the better parent to give custody to? And on the topic of high conflict divorce, when judges call a predatory dynamic high conflict, well, over time, if both parents, albeit for very different reasons for sure, but if both parents look emotional, angry, focused on each other, how's the judge not supposed to call the situation high conflict? So let's not do that. Let's let one parent keep being the disordered, predatory person that you feel they are. You, on the other hand, have to show a pattern of cooperative, child-focused, courteous intentions. That's how you show that the conflict is only on one side. And you can't do that without emotional detachment. I'll cover later in this episode, I'll cover the jade and the biff and see why these are a lot easier to use. These tools are a lot easier to apply when we're emotionally detached. So mindset work is not optional. We have a lot of people looking for legal strategies and advice and tips and tricks and documentation guidance and what to say, what not to say. And all of those things matter for sure, but they only work if your nervous system is regulated. They only work when you're emotionally detached. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you'll just get pissed off at the valid advice that pages like Family Court Corner or Judge Anthony on social media have to offer, and you'll miss important opportunities to move forward without even realizing it, because you're still feeling so strongly about things. Without emotional detachment, you'll react instead of responding. You'll overshare information which will be used against you. You'll look unstable in court, and what you say will get misconstrued. With emotional detachment, you're calm, and so you can show that you're the safe parent. You're precise to build a case with your attorney. You're consistent, so you keep increasing that gap in behavior between the two parents. And you're credible, which increases the odds that things turn in favor of protecting the kids. So more on what I just said about pages like Family Court Corner or Judge Anthony on social media, and there's dozens of divorce coaches and high conflict court battle specialists. Most of these people, definitely not all of them, they give really good advice and solid strategies, but that advice assumes that you are already regulated. If you're still trauma bonded, triggered, you've still got raging PTSD, you're still codependent, completely emotionally enmeshed and entangled, you will not be able to apply any of it. It will piss you off. So people like legal influencers or court strategy accounts, I just gave you the two examples that I absolutely love. Anthony Bompiani, also known as Judge Anthony, and Angela at Family Court Corner. These only help after detachment. Their advice will trigger you, or they'll make you feel powerless if you listen to it while you're still very attached to the situation from an emotional perspective. What they say is valid, and it's turned my case around after years of losing and hearing after hearing and judge after judge. But I was only able to fully leverage their advice and the mindset shifts that they preach after I had completely detached and I was finally able to think clearly and to understand the rules of the game. Because again, you won't win in court by being right or by feeling strongly about things. You will increase your odds of winning by being regulated, consistent, strategic, coachable, and impossible to trigger and bait. Legal strategy and advice works best when your nervous system is regulated. Otherwise, you will flat out refuse to hear it. You'll think it's dumb, and or you will sabotage yourself without realizing it. You'll keep fucking up, and in the process of fucking up over and over, you'll lose self-respect and self-confidence because your emotions and your nervous system are running the show. You'll have all this great advice that you've understood cognitively, but your nervous system makes it impossible for you to apply it. And you'll feel like you're dumb. You'll start to blame yourself for not being able to apply advice that you understand cognitively. That is so frustrating. I'd really like to spare you that experience because that was me for a very long time. You won't be able to reframe the things you want to say that are based in emotion into something child-focused, rational, and impactful. You won't be able to show up as genuinely cooperative in the co-parenting relationship if you're still traumatized by this person. You'll lose hope and you'll spiral if you look to apply that advice while you're still a giant mess. That's the core of what I'm wanting you to understand with season 2. There is a gap. Maybe people should study season 2 of the Light in the Battle podcast for free. Work on detaching emotionally, create that bandwidth in their heads so that they can then loop back over to Judge Anthony and Family Court Corner and actually receive that advice and see how valid it is and powerful it is. You'll be better able to receive that advice after you've worked through the steps that I suggest in season 2. In season 2, I've recommended that you work through in that order, but whatever works for you, whatever your therapist may recommend. And it might actually not be a linear process necessarily. You may want to tackle several aspects at once because they're actually tied for a lot of them. But the order that the episodes dropped in was first the trauma bond, then PTSD and EMDR as a form of trauma therapy, forgiveness without reconciliation, codependency, mentorship and fellowship, gratitude, surrender, and grief last week. This was an intentional journey. There was an organized process to make you unshakable and coachable. When we talk about emotional detachment, I'm not trying to get you to give up. Emotional detachment is not giving up and it's not becoming passive. It is actually sticking fully to your goal and to your strategy and unleashing all the bandwidth that you free up when you're no longer being controlled by your emotions. What it looks like when you're emotionally detached is that you're no longer reacting to the bait that's being thrown at you. You're no longer over-explaining and providing information that you shouldn't be, that will be used against you. You're not chasing as if the other person's state of mind was controlling your life. And you're no longer trying to be understood. These are all things we'll cover a little bit later when I talk about Biff and Jade. You want control over your thoughts, your mind, and where you're going and how you're going to present your case and how you'll show up in court. Basically, for those of you who have watched Yellowstone, you become the bigger bear. You're the bigger bear. You've got the evidence and the stuff that is required to protect those kids. You have it, it's available to you. You're the bigger bear. You're not the one who should be afraid. He is. That needs to click. What this changes in real life, when you're detached, your communication changes. So you're no longer providing email after email of evidence that you're also a high conflict person and you look unhinged and you look angry. Your documentation improves because you've got more bandwidth to think clearly about what you want to focus on and how you want to prove it. And the whole thing is just more strategic. You're better able to let the professionals coach you as to what we're going to focus on and how we're going to prove it. When you're detached, you stop creating evidence against yourself. You stop getting pulled into chaos, which protects yourself from the exhaustion that comes with that. And you stop feeding the conflict. Again, how's the judge supposed to tell who's high conflict and who isn't if you always take the bait and send long, angry emails? You're coming from the place of trauma, sure, but you look in the eyes of someone who doesn't know you, you look just as high conflict as the dysfunctional parent. And so instead, you let patterns speak for themselves. You give it time. You orient conversations with the other parent to gather the information you need, and you document quietly. Very concrete examples of what emotional detachment can impact in your life. You've probably heard the acronyms DARVO, JADE, and BIF, and then we'll talk about gray rocking and a couple other things that are very concrete examples of things that can become a lot better and a lot easier when you're emotionally detached. So we hear about DARVO. DARVO is a set of behaviors that we sometimes have to deal with in high conflict co-parenting situations. It's an acronym for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. Well, let's start with deny. Once you are rooted in reality, you no longer engage in that. They can deny all they want. You're rooted in reality. Attack. They can attack all they want. That's no longer an issue once you've created a sense of safety for yourself. We've talked about that here and there in season 2 as kind of a fruit of all the work that we've done. But I'll dive a lot deeper into that specific aspect, the sense of safety, in season 3. And then reverse victim and offender, once you've dealt with your codependency, that no longer works. It will no longer work on you. The next thing that becomes easier to deal with is the JADE acronym. We talk about how we are tempted to justify ourselves, argue, defend, and explain. JADE. Well, you're not going to be justifying yourself anymore if you've recovered your confidence in your decisions, especially after years of gaslighting. You're no longer going to argue and maintain that intensity level after you've forgiven the person and you've dropped the resentment. Defend, well, you won't see the other as a threat anymore if you've dealt with your PTSD or CPTSD. And explain, you won't need to explain yourself constantly. If you have a clear head and you see the person's challenges and personality traits for what they are, you've created some distance. You're detached. You no longer justify, argue, defend, and explain, and you save a ton of energy by not doing any of that. And then we talk about a communication style that is called BIF, for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Well, it's a lot easier to use that once you're emotionally detached. You're no longer going to ramble based in emotion. You won't be rehashing the past or going off topic. You won't resent the person so much anymore. And you won't be worrying about them and their response and their reaction and what that's going to trigger so much. You won't worry about that so much anymore. You can be firm. Another thing that's easier to do once you've achieved emotional detachment is gray rocking. It's much easier being boring when the triggers don't work, when the bait is clear as day. You see it. Obviously, this is bait. And when the intensity is only on one side of the equation. When you detach emotionally, that's when you can finally become super boring. Another fruit of emotional detachment is what I've covered earlier. For your mindset shift and the coaching that you will receive, you will not hear the mindset shifts that are recommended to you if you're still stuck in your emotions. So you let go of what keeps you ruminating, afraid, and trapped mentally. You can take some perspective and look at your case from a different angle. That's the key. And then documentation also becomes easier once you've achieved emotional detachment. It's a lot easier to work with your legal professional person to determine the strategy you'll be using, the items that you want to focus on versus all the things that were very emotionally triggering, but we're not even going to bring it up. That can be tough, accepting that all of that over there that this person did, we're not even going to bring it to the judge's attention. You can't do that if you're still very emotionally raw. Okay. Collecting the proof that you need and organizing it in the way that it needs to be organized, that becomes achievable when you're no longer flooded with terror, when you're able to take the focus away in your mind from the co-parent and how they make you feel and over onto your kids and their future. Every single item I've covered in season 2 is to nail a distraction that takes your focus away from strategizing. Understand that you're not being powerful or impactful by being loud, by being emotional and reactive, and you're certainly not able to be impactful if you're overwhelmed or when you see this whole experience as agony. You now have impact and you can change the course of your case once you're calm, consistent, you're contained, you've become a stable parent, you've become a credible adult, and you're a coachable strategic thinker. And you see that whole experience as what it is, no more, no less. Now I want to bring it back to the child, because family court is not just about you and the co-parenting relationship. It's actually not about you at all. You won't be able to move the needle much by talking about what you went through. Where you shift the course of the case is by focusing solely on the kid's experience and on the co-parenting issues. You take the focus away from you, or you deal with what you went through in a different court system, and you focus on what family court wants to look at, which is your child, their stability, their perceived safety, and what they're exposed to. That's where you can document strategically by gathering evidence that the kids are not in a stable environment at the other parent's house, that they're not safe, etc., etc. In addition to, so that's the focus on the kids, in addition to documenting the parts of the co-parenting relationship that are making it challenging to make decisions together. Examples of that can be the fact that you're receiving threats, or that the other parent gets in the way of the kids getting medical care, and so you can't move forward in making decisions together. I will let Family Court Corner teach you how to do all of that. But it's the next step after you've achieved emotional detachment. And by the way, when you're regulated, you also create safety, predictability, and emotional stability at home in your day-to-day. And that's crucial to create an environment where your kids can thrive especially for neurodivergent moms and kids. By detaching emotionally, you can get an email from your lawyer in the middle of dinner and stay grounded, stay regulated, and keep carrying on a conversation about how school went today. It's possible. It's possible. It can be done. That's the goal of this season. It's a lot of work, but you can get there. But this regulation shows up in the quality of your day-to-day life, and in turn in the quality of your kids' day-to-day as well, and which makes up their entire childhood. That's the stuff that you can control. Okay? So when you hear emotional detachment, I don't want you to think about becoming passive or giving up. I had a woman on Facebook to whom I was suggesting that she might need to get a little perspective on her situation. And her response was, "Don't think I'll ever stop fighting for my daughter." Well, emotional detachment is quite the opposite. I'm not inviting you to give up and to stop fighting. None of those will help your case. The whole point of detaching is that you can fight for your kids and increase your chances of actually winning instead of just struggling inside that net, inside that Chinese finger trap. You refocus that energy towards your case. Remaining very emotional and saying things like, "Don't think I'll ever stop fighting for my daughter," while I 100% understand what she's saying, I can relate to what she's feeling because I've been in that mindset and in that struggle energy for many years, the years where I was losing at every hearing. That tells me that you're exhausting yourself. That tells me you're one of those moms that may still be stuck in that step where the emotions are really raw and you might be diluting yourself completely based on things that you feel strongly. And I'm sure you feel a lot of things very strongly. We all have, and we still do, but that's not how you're going to move forward and move the needle in your case because you're fighting reality. What will help your case is when you get to a point where you control what you can control, namely your behavior, your mindset, your strategy, and a choice to keep it child focused. Okay? So you've done something really difficult in this season. It's pretty huge. You've looked at your patterns, your pain, the state of your nervous system, the way you see the other parent, the way you react to the other parent, and you've chosen to change that. It's huge. And what this might get you to, and that's my wish for you, is that it gets you to freedom, to a state of freedom, to a version of yourself that's even better than what you were when you were targeted by this person years ago. It's an incredible opportunity for growth. Okay. If this season has helped you, I would like to ask that you follow the show, please, and share it with another mom who may need it. Definitely take your time integrating everything you've learned. And you can also follow my page on Facebook at Light in the Battle, one word, where you can connect with other survivors in your same situation and keep up on what's going on with this podcast. So how do I conclude this? I want you to thank yourself, actually, if you've done any of the work that I suggest in this season. Any of it. Any one episode is a lot of work. And it requires so much humility and so much courage. So I want you to thank yourself and give yourself a high five. Do like a self five if you've seriously considered working on any of season 2. I commend you for being humble enough to understand that whatever you're doing is not working. I commend you for no longer blaming the system, blaming your lawyer, blaming this, that, and the other. Although, some lawyers are incompetent to deal with dysfunctional dynamics for sure. But the mindset of blaming it all on others, of staying in victim mode, of not looking at how you may be creating problems, that's got to go. And I commend you for even being here and being open to hearing that. You're way ahead of where you were a while ago. So kudos to you. I truly hope this season was helpful. It's been a ton of work for me. I'm very proud of it. And I am confident that it is the missing link for survivors between coming out of abuse, dealing with post-separation abuse, legal abuse, losing, and then trying to learn from divorce coaches that have the correct advice. Between the two, there has to be a mindset shift, and that's what this season is for. So thank you for being here. I wish you all the best. Let's keep those babies safe, and we'll see you in season 3. And until then, please remember that your only job today is to stay standing until bedtime. And you'll do that again tomorrow and the day after until things start to look a little brighter. We'll see you next week.